Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to welcome you to this very important topic that we're going to be discussing, which is Title II Amendment Impact Virginia Higher Educational Institutions Ramp Up Towards Document Accessibility. As several of you may know, document accessibility has been important and has been critical, and the awareness has been growing about how it matters for individuals, regardless of their ability to have equal access to navigate and understand digital content. And in light of some of the recent amendments to Title II of the ADA, there is a new era that we're seeing, which is a higher level of accountability and action around digital accessibility, especially for higher educational institutions, colleges, and universities. So today we want to explore what these changes mean. And specifically, we're going to be looking at it through the lens of the Virginia higher education institutions and how they're responding, and then what really are some good use cases, some approaches that are impactful in this space. So, whatever space of accessibility you come from, I hope you'll find this to be a valuable, experience, and also very insightful because of our guests. And I'll be talking to about our guests in just a minute. So before we dive in, I wanted to address some housekeeping items. So one is that closed captions are available for the webinar. I've enabled them, but you can also enable them on your end. And if you are on a mobile device, you might need to check your screen to see the toolbar and kind of access that. We'll have a couple of dedicated Q&A sessions during the webinar, so you can submit your questions in the Q&A section. You can also expect to receive a recorded version of this session if you've registered for it. We will also send an accessible copy of the deck that we're presenting. Again, thanks so much for being here today. And yeah, we are ready to get started. Debanku, can we go to slide 2? The next slide. Great. So we're going to start with a brief introduction. So I'll start with myself. My name is Vijayashree Vedantam. I go by VJ. I'm SVP Growth and Strategy at Continual Engine, and I'm based out of Chicago. Continual Engine is a AI technology accessibility company, and we are committed to helping make digital content accessible and inclusive for everyone. So one of our key solutions, Prep, helps streamline document remediation, and we have had the pleasure of partnering with Virginia Tech and George Mason University in some of these endeavors. I've myself been in the space of higher education for about a couple of decades and had an opportunity to look at how accessibility has been evolving. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce today's speakers, who are the true leaders and champions in the space of accessibility. So each of them has played a very hands-on role in driving impactful initiatives, especially around Virginia higher education landscape. They've been helping improve visibility, building more sustainable workflows, as well as advancing the creation of accessible formats. So a lot of what we've learned during the course of our engagements has been a direct result of partnering very closely with Korey and Mark. So Korey, I'm going to hand it off to you for introductions.
Thank you, VJ. Appreciate it. And thank you guys for having me. My name is Korey Singleton. I am the Deputy ADA Coordinator for Accessibility and Manager of George Mason's Assistive Technology Initiative. Our office is tasked with overseeing digital accessibility compliance for the institution. I have been in this role for a little over 17 years now. So like VJ was mentioning, I've seen quite a few changes here at Mason, most of which have been very beneficial for us as it relates to advancing digital access. And I'll pass it off to Mark.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today and be connecting with you. Appreciate you joining. My name is Mark Nichols. I have the pleasure of serving as the Senior Director for Universal Design and Accessible Technologies at Virginia Tech. I work with a great team that's housed inside of a teaching and learning unit underneath of our Provost office, and we help provide guidance and support and training and access to tools for assistive technologies and web accessibility and accessible documents. And I I've been at Virginia Tech since 2017. I've seen some great initiatives and changes across the university to model and integrate best practices with digital accessibility. And I'm happy to be here today to share some of those ideas, and hopefully you'll find some tips and strategies that you'll be able to take away and pull into your own respective institutions.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark and Korey. Again, very excited to have you and have this conversation. So I want to go into our key points that we're going to be discussing today. So as I mentioned, in higher education and most organizations today, we're seeing how accessible PDFs play a critical role in providing equal access. So in the context of education, that would be in course material, administrative documents, public resources. And so the whole idea of making PDFs and documents accessible is not new, but it's just kind of been gaining momentum, rightly so. So in today's session, we want to explore the impact of the Title II amendments on accessibility, document accessibility. What do they mean specifically for higher education institutions? And then we're looking at Virginia specific compliance expectations as well as how Virginia schools have been really moving towards this and the changes that are reshaping accessibility practices, emerging trends in accessibility, and then the evolution of the support structures that enable this. You'll kind of get a good idea of why these are important as we go along. But if you have questions, like I said, there are these two opportunities to ask them. Somewhere in the middle of the webinar, we'll pause for some Q&A, and then again towards the end. And you can feel free to add your questions in the Q&A form of of Zoom. So with that, I'm actually going into my very first question, which is going to be for Korey. And this is about WEEP. So I want to learn a little bit more about WEEP and how the organization's helping support higher education, K-12, and then basically the state agencies around the Commonwealth. Korey, you may be on mute.
I am. Thank you. Sorry about that. So VEAP stands for Virginia Higher Education Accessibility Partners. It started probably a little over 10 years ago, and it really just started with discussions. So 4 or 5 of the largest institutions, those of us kind of dealing with digital access at those institutions, pretty much just kind of got together, started having conversations and discussions around things we were experiencing at our respective institutions, challenges. So, how do you get faculty members to caption content? How do you get them to remediate their own documents? How do you address web accessibility? What are you doing about accessibility in the purchasing and procurement process? And those discussions kind of started to reveal where we had some shared opportunities, where we had some opportunities to kind of move forward together and then kind of take back those respective things. Mark kind of referenced this earlier, where, and I've said this at other presentations, I'm not above stealing from other folks. I'll give them all the credit in the world, but I'm not above stealing ideas and taking those things back to George Mason in order to advance what we're trying to do. And I think in a lot of ways, VEAP gives us an opportunity to see what other institutions are doing, what they're experiencing, and kind of bringing those things back to our specific, bringing those back in our respective roles and trying to advance digital access culture on our campus. And so it's since grown beyond higher ed, obviously, to include representatives from K-12, representatives from state agencies as well. We're all dealing with the same challenges. We all have to deal with websites and web accessibility. We all have to deal with digital content that we have to make accessible documents. There's no Word documents for higher ed and Word documents for K-12. It's all the same thing. So there are a lot of things we can do and work together to do. And so some of the examples you reference here in the slide were cooperative purchasing agreements. This is one of the early things that we saw was an easy way for us to kind of work together. And I'll go into this briefly before, kind of moving off, so Mark can kind of comment. But one of the first things we did was put together a cooperative purchasing agreement around captioning, transcription, and audio description. What we saw is that, at Mason, we started captioning around 2012, but there was only so much money that Mason could spend before we could drive down the price that vendors were offering, the permanent prices that they were offering for captioning and transcription at that time. But there was an opportunity for us to try and figure out how we could pool our money together with Virginia Tech, with UVA, with JMU to say, hey, if we're all going to the vendor to say we're willing to buy from you, not necessarily specifically, but we're willing to work with you and, maybe drive some business your way. Are you willing to work with us on, rates that could be more advantageous for us? Could you work with us on supporting those who have a centralized model versus those who have a distributed model? And so those kinds of things led to what that cooperative purchasing agreement is. And I know Mark will expand on that more as we've moved in some other directions in recent years.
Great. Mark, do you have anything to add? I'm sure there'll be more opportunities to speak to this during our conversation today.
Yeah, I'll just add a few things and build upon what Corey has mentioned here. So, I think one of the ideal aspects with Veep is that it's a group of thought partners that the goal is leveraging the collective minds in the state of Virginia and not recreating the wheel and pulling the collective minds together on a variety of different projects and professional development opportunities and resources so that we're building capacity across the state, not just in individual institutions. And Corey and I were just commenting just earlier today, when we take a moment to take a step back and look at what's been accomplished by this organization, it's been truly fascinating. This organization has grown. There's now a board of directors that's 11 strong. The membership is, I think, slightly north of 200 members and increasing on a yearly basis. But it's really neat to see how this community can help serve the entire Commonwealth of Virginia to help with advocacy and advancing inclusion and participation for all individuals with disabilities in both education and employment verticals, throughout the Commonwealth. So it's been a really fascinating journey with Veep and one that many other states or other institutions could set up and model and create in their own respective areas. It's just finding those accessibility champions and pulling them together. And I'll be talking more about that probably later on today and some of those efforts that we've been able to accomplish at Virginia Tech around those champions.
Great. Yeah, Mark, I think that is really kind of bringing us to our next question, which is you talked about champions and you talked about just, kind of bringing people together on this. It would be really great to hear a little bit more about how are Virginia institutions developing these collaborative networks between these small and large schools to meet your accessibility goals? Like, what are your approaches? That would be great to hear a little bit more about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start from the image on the slide here of the pyramid. I'm going to start at the bottom of the pyramid and then do a soft lateral over to Corey for the top part there related to the legislative efforts. But one of Veep's critical elements is providing professional development, and this is a critical component of our resources that we offer to the Veep community. One of the things listed on the slide is that we've done a variety of lunch and learns, and these are generally 1 hour in length, facilitated very much like this session, but facilitated by members of Veep, and it includes a variety of topics that Veep members have indicated are a need or of interest, and those have included like ADA knowledge, leveling up your ADA knowledge. They've included transitions from K-12 into the higher ed space, generative AI and its impact on accessibility and where we're heading and where we're going, web accessibility, physical accessibility, the list goes on and on. We generally offer 4, 5, 6 sessions every year for lunch and learns, but it's been a great way to connect and start conversations that then yield additional collaborations and discussions around how we can work collaboratively together across the Commonwealth. We've also done vendor town halls with specific vendors, and some of those are generally longer, multi-hour or half-day sessions that really focus on building knowledge of the resources and supports that often already exist within the institutions that don't require too much of a fiscal addition in order to acquire or get access to those tools. And then most recently, I'll just highlight, we just this last month, Veep partnered with Ahead in Virginia and had a 2-day event called Bridging Access Conference. Ahead in Virginia was the first day, and it was a very traditional conference format, focused around accommodations and disability in higher education. And the second day was the VEEP sponsored unconference. And this is the modality of this unconference, if you will, is to really encourage open, free flowing discussion and communication. It's about building community. So we don't have preset topics. The folks that are in the room develop those in real time, and then we break out and have conversations and ideate and figure out, okay, you're doing this at your institution. How are you doing this at your institution? Are there opportunities to leverage, as Korey said, kind of cherry pick or steal from others in order to enhance your services at your institution? It's a very low key, very collaborative, exciting opportunity for folks all across the Commonwealth in the K-12 space, higher ed space, state agency space to get together and have that. And so all of that is part of sort of VEEP's mission in providing and fostering professional development opportunities.
Yeah, Mark, I really enjoyed the unconference, so I agree. It's like an amazing format to get people together on an important topic, and also a lot of free flowing great ideas. Just kind of being part of that allows us to kind of by osmosis kind of learn what's going on. Korey, do you want to add anything to it? Because we're going to break for our first Q&A and take some questions.
Yeah, I'll add a few things. Mark's done an excellent job covering a lot of what we've done. What I will say is that, and I'll add on for the unconference, what's exciting is to see all the energy from folks that weren't a part of those initial discussions years ago. So to see them excited and bringing new ideas and fresh perspectives and approaches to digital access is great too. What I'll point out is that as well is that part of what you see as you start to talk to others around the state is you kind of figure out where the choke points are around digital access. Like what's holding me back from being able to do this at my institution, or what's holding me back from being able to do other things. And so I'll reference purchasing and procurement specifically because we are all trying to figure out how to address that challenge at our respective institutions. And so one of the things we saw um, on our end is that the Code of Virginia's Information Technology Access Act had not been updated since I believe 1999 here in the state. And all of this for the most part predates internet and some of those other things we, kind of take for granted these days. And so when we started looking at it, there's a provision in there that essentially allows the head of a covered entity to just say, hey, we're not going to deal with digital access, or hey, we're not going to deal with making this content accessible. So we had a lot of concerns about that because we felt like that was something that would hold us up. And if there was ever an issue in the federal government space, which nobody ever foresaw us, kind of being in the situation now where we have some concerns about like the final rule and where these provisions would move through, then what do we do on a state level to kind of protect ourselves? And so one of the things we did was a few years ago, I happened to get lucky. Laura Corsine, she's since retired at UVA, but I'll point her out. She and I were sitting there talking over a beer after a conference one day and laughing that, hey, we should try to change the law. And neither one of us thought we would ever, do anything like that. But literally, like not even a few months later, I got pulled into to sit on a panel that a faculty member had pulled together for their students around digital access. And one of the delegates from Virginia's House of Delegates happened to be on the panel as well. And Delegate Kathy Tran, had introduced a bill to improve web accessibility in K-12 institutions throughout the state. And so when I read through the bill, I was like, wow, this would really work for higher ed as well. And so I reached out to her. Within a month, we were having conversations. I pulled Mark in, I pulled Lori in, pulled Barb from UVA as well, Barb Zunder, and we started working with them to provide them with some context for what we were dealing with in higher ed as well, and how we could partner to make the bill stronger and potentially get us across the line. And so 3.5 years later, we got the bill across the line where it was unanimously voted, supported in the House and in the Virginia Senate, and then signed by the governor, several weeks later. But House Bill 2541 integrates accessibility into the purchasing and procurement process. It's not everything we wanted in the very beginning, where we would require VPAT for all of these purchases You would require them to kind of identify digital accessibility coordinators, but a lot of what we wanted got in there. So the VPATs are still a part of it. It's just more of an option by the covered entity. We expanded it. We broadened that law to look to include all disabilities, not just blind, low vision access and things like that. So I'll put a link in the chat for it, so that people, if they want to read up on it, they can. And actually, it'll be a link from our Veep website. But that was us partnering together to figure out how do we move us forward. And so now that the new law will come into a place and it actually aligns with the Title II rule, changes. Um, Once that new law is in place, now we can start having discussions about how do we move this forward in a practical manner. So, and that was that was a lot of the discussion in this year's VPON conference, which is how do we get together to talk about, integrating accessibility in the purchasing procurement process? Do we talk about ways that we could have, reciprocity agreements where we're all kind of testing the same way and using the same tools? And so again, if we didn't have Veep, then how do what vehicle do we use to advance those discussions? So Veep has opened that door for us.
Yeah, Corey, that's a great story. I really love that, building towards what has happened, which is including higher education in the bill and making sure that the important aspects of accessibility purchase are included, as well as the power of the collective. So that's a huge part of what we're discussing today, which is like how do you get together on a very important aspect, but understand that the burden is not with one educational institution or organization, but really having these shared best practices. So we want to kind of go to our first Q&A interruption. Want to see if there are some questions that are coming up. We will have again an opportunity towards the end of the webinar as well. But if there are any questions, please put them on the Q&A. You should see that option available to you. So while we wait for questions, I'm going to ask my first question, Corey and Mark, which is essentially when you are kind of getting together, do you tend to focus on one topic and kind of make impact, or do you tend to work through a few topics around accessibility? And you were talking about purchasing and finding good options to help scale accessibility. Can you maybe speak to that?
Sure, I guess I'll go ahead and start and then Mark can jump in. It's wide ranging. I would say the discussions are pretty wide ranging. Usually you're coming with an issue and then it kind of balloons from there. But that's kind of the beauty of it. And that's what I really enjoy about the group and enjoy about the unconference, as well. It's all structured in a similar way. You're bringing those issues and those concerns, and then you have folks who are either having shared experiences or they have solutions that they can offer you in ways to kind of approach it a little differently. So it's a pretty open bag, I would say.
Yeah, and I would just add that, we have the formality of Veep is that we do have a group of board of directors, and oftentimes, which generally meets monthly, and oftentimes topics are brought to this board of director meeting that start as a, hey, should we do this or how do we tackle this? And then it leads into, okay, let's establish some formality behind this. Maybe this is a subcommittee. We want to reach out to membership to see who might want to be involved in these efforts. And then things kind of take off from there. And sometimes they turn into formal things. Sometimes they turn into lunch and learns. Sometimes they turn into, just hey, just gathering input, and we're going to put those resources or include those ideas in our next planning phases for upcoming events or unconferences or so I would say that it's very dynamic, constantly evolving to meet the needs of the entire Veep community.
Yeah, that's really good to know, Mark and Corey. So there is one question from Chris O'Neill, which we will hold to the end for Chris's note. But there's another question from L. Jones, which is how does a college join Veep?
I'll take a quick and easy one. How to join Veep. So on the Veep's website, you can join the listserv, and anybody is able. It's open to everybody. UVA actually manages the Veep listserv. Our board of directors from UVA, and so it's free. There's no cost associated with it, and you're able to participate in pretty much everything that we offer. The only thing that has a fiscal element to it is the unconference. There's a small fiscal commitment to help with the operation and food and everything else that's provided during that. But all of the other events and activities and the online resources are all free. And if you happen to get the link to one of our online resources, and this is in our bylaws, you actually indirectly become a member of Veep by participating in those, even if you aren't already a member of Veep. So like I said, the community is constantly growing, but we welcome anybody who's doing this work in the Commonwealth of Virginia to join us.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. So we will actually jump into the next question that we have today, which is essentially looking at the differences in accessibility compliance based on the different types of institutions you have, because it's not like a one size fits model. So what unique challenges and opportunities do you think small institutions face in achieving compliance, and how do these compare with typically some of the advantages or resources that are available a little bit more in plenty with the larger institutions? Korey, that question is for you, and then we can pass it on to Mark. You're on mute.
Thank you. I'll just keep it unmuted from this point forward. One of the things I'll say is that, and you have them listed on the slide, but resources and budget tends, I think, be the biggest challenge that we hear about when it comes to dealing with smaller institutions. We have an agency here in the state called Virginia Information Technology Agency, VITA, which oversees information technology services broadly throughout the state. A number of the larger institutions are able to essentially negotiate with getting some autonomy and administration over certain things. So, like, for example, Virginia is, I mean, I'm not Virginia, but George Mason, I believe, is level 3 now, but I'll reference the level 2 piece of it, which is when you reach level 2 or your level 2 institution, you have the ability to control your capital projects, your information technology. I think security is a part of that, and then also purchasing procurement. So you have a lot of autonomy to kind of manage that in a lot of different ways. I think a lot of the smaller institutions are in situations where they are stuck kind of dealing with what VITA is kind of, doing broadly throughout the state. There can be a benefit and opportunity to that, in that you're able to take advantage of VITA's resources and supports around a lot of that, or a lot of the technology that's in place, but you're also kind of restricted to what they may choose and what they choose for, some higher education, some institutions may be different than what, what works out for others, depending on your college community or your university community. So I would say that's where a big challenge exists. Where I would say there is an opportunity, however, in this, is that if you think about it from a shared resources perspective or a shared services perspective, if, for example, I'll just point out, some of the community colleges. I think there are 23 different community college campuses throughout the state. If they're all using Canvas and they're all kind of, and there's like a shared purchasing, and procurement kind of process that's happening, then, Mark talked about this earlier, where, why are we reinventing the wheel? So if we're training on campus and, Canvas in one way at Germanna Community College, maybe we can have some discussions with Northern Virginia Community College or Tidewater Community College about how they're training on Canvas. If they're dealing with accessibility issues at Northern Virginia Community College in one way, maybe we can start, talking about how we can share this work, this Microsoft accessibility training, or this, Canvas accessibility training. So if you can avoid ways of reinventing the wheel and kind of doing that in 23 different instances, as opposed to one shared way of kind of approaching it, that can be a really effective way of moving things forward quickly, because then you maybe can have a more concise message that goes out to all faculty, all community college faculty. And I'm using community colleges as an example here, but that is one way where you can think of it as an opportunity. We may be a little restricted in the choices that we make and the tools that we choose, but there are some opportunities to kind of advance accessibility a little more broadly, because we're all using the same tools and resources. So those are just some quick examples I'll throw out.
And so you're really looking at commonalities from what you're describing, Corey, which is like rather
Mhm.
than focusing on the differences, looking at where there is an easier overlap and then being able to pull from that and being able to share more widely, and not focusing as much on like what the differences are, which they of course remain. So yeah, those
Of
are
course.
really some good insights.
And
Mark,
you also get, if I can add one point, Vijay,
yes.
I'm sorry. You also find, and I mentioned this earlier, you also kind of find where the choke point is. Where are we struggling to move things forward, right? And so, like in the community colleges, if the struggle is around getting people to make PDF documents accessible, but it's not so much around Word and PowerPoint, then what do we need to do for PDF documents specifically across the entire community college system? Structure. Is it one vendor we need to work with? Is it one specific tool we need to think about? Do we take this out of the hands of faculty? So I know documents are a part of, what drew people to this session. And if we're talking about it specifically around document remediation, what is the choke point? What is the challenge that is impacting our ability to move things forward? Um, and so if you can find a common training or a common tool or a common resource that can support everybody, then maybe you can drive down the costs of doing that. Maybe you can and figure out, an easy training resource that can help with that. So that's just another one I wanted to expand on. Sorry.
No, no, that's perfect add-on, and kind of takes me to what I was gonna ask Mark as a continuation of the question, which is, Mark, it would be nice if you could speak to it actually a little bit more around document accessibility, because that is one interesting topic for most, like even outside of higher education.
Yeah, I kind of see, comparing small to larger, I equate this to kind of on the lake or in the water, repositioning a 25-foot wakeboard boat as the smaller institutions is much easier than repositioning a battleship out in the ocean. Drawing a correlation of a larger higher ed institution. With looking at document accessibility, I think an advantage from the smaller institutions is that they can leverage the learned experiences from the larger institutions. We have a massive of a volume of PDFs and documents and PowerPoint presentations that are used both inside of our LMS and outside within our CMS or multiple CMSs that we have here at Virginia Tech. And so having that opportunity to trial and establish workflows and processes for internal remediation and what that looks like on consultative and training models, but also establish models that seek external remediation services, and then being able to share those with smaller institutions so they can be very strategic and targeted, because lots of times the smaller institutions don't have dedicated full-time accessibility staff. So let the larger institutions, take the first pass and understand the ins and outs of these services and what works and what doesn't work, and then share broadly with the rest of the community across the Commonwealth of Virginia, so that others can stand up their own instances and learn from the trials and tribulations that we have experienced as a larger institution. And that's not only for documents. That would apply to everything. Even our web environments. Virginia Tech has in our CMS over 148,000 pages. And so scaling that with liaisons that need to help with those efforts. I mean, this is a massive initiative that we have at Virginia Tech. And an advantage that the smaller schools have is potentially they're able to establish networks more easily and have a smaller subset of files, documents, websites, applications that all need remediation assistance. So they can learn from those larger institutions and then apply those ideas, the concepts, those connections with vendors through the cooperative contracts in order to scale their efforts in the quickest and most timely manner to provide access to the users, whether or not they're students or users of the services offered by the institution.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. It actually moves into our next question, which is also a question from the audience. I want to kind of combine them so we can address a couple of these themes. So, I guess what would be nice is to hear a little bit about what are the effective approaches when it comes to the partnerships, and then also third-party vendors for document accessibility compliance. So, it would be nice to hear some examples. And the question from the attendee is, what are the tools and solutions out there that Veep has procured through these joint institution relationships? So I think they tie nicely together. And I think, Korey, this is for you, and of course, Mark, for you to add to it as well.
Sorry, can you repeat that question one more time, BJ?
Yes, yes. So the question is, what are the approaches that these institutions that are of varied size can take to partner more effectively? So there are like specific examples or use cases or things that you see happening at a ground,
Sure.
as well as the models that you use. And I was trying to tie it to the questions of the tools and solutions that are out there that Veep has been procuring through these joint institution relationship. And that's a question that came from the audience.
Thank you. All right. So, yeah, just to speak about, we were talking about cooperative purchasing agreements earlier. We actually just finished one this year. Continual Engine is one of the vendors that's a part of that partnership. And that included kind of ad hoc services for document mediation and Braille translation. We always get into situations where, especially now with the ADA Title II, the upcoming changes, that where we may need to remediate large repositories or large batches of PDF documents, for example. And then also we're in situations where we have like kind of last minute needs for accommodation. You have a student who may need access to some content and you just don't have the bandwidth or the resources to be able to do it in-house, and being able to send that off to a vendor is helpful as well. So that those cooperative purchasing agreements have us working with eventually with 3 vendors, Continual Engine being one of them. I'll put a link in the chat so that you can see those. You can actually review that information online and what's available to you. I believe Align is one, and Allied Instructional Services is another that we are working with. And all bring kind of different things to the table. Some focus specifically on PDF remediation, some focus on Braille translation, and some offer some other supports and services as well. As it relates to tools at GMU, our university community has a campus-wide license for the Adobe Creative Cloud, and so that means everybody can get access to Acrobat Pro DC for free. So it's a little harder to advance everybody kind of using other tools. So we spend a lot of time training on how they can use Acrobat Pro DC. And now, for those who've kind of been doing this for a while, you probably experiencing the same thing as we are, where it's very difficult to get faculty members and instructors to learn how to remediate PDF documents. That's just a very challenging area. So we spend a lot of time kind of showing them how to address accessibility in Word and PowerPoint. For those who are interested, we will teach them how to make PDF documents accessible. But we also work very closely with vendors like Continual Engine, where we will outsource content as needed. And so the way we kind of handle things at Mason is we strongly encourage faculty members to make their content accessible. We know, however, that for whatever reason they're not going to. And so we have the ability to remediate in-house. Our accessible media coordinator, Robert Starr, will remediate content in-house. When it is too much for him, we will outsource it to a vendor. What that does give us is the ability to address accommodations fairly quickly. So I think if you looked at a lot of the settlement agreements that have happened with higher education institutions and their challenges around document accessibility, or other areas, it's that there wasn't necessarily a plan in place to remediate content quickly, whether it's a website or a document, or figure out how to address an inaccessible application or a tool or resource. I think where we have benefited is that if an issue is identified, we're able to remediate that issue in a fairly quick turnaround time, whether it's a day or 2 days or even hours. And that allows the student to kind of stay at a similar pace as their peers. Whereas I think if you look at the settlement agreements, you'll find that there may be some breakdowns in this kind of strategy. That has been our document accessibility approach. It's been, we use a badging. We have a couple of courses out there. One that teaches people how to make Word, PowerPoint, and PDF documents accessible. Another that leverages the Trusted Tester for Web training to teach our web developers and web content authors how to make content accessible. And so for those that are interested in, our typical champions, those are the folks that we are working very closely with. For those that are probably a little more reluctant to kind of take on those efforts on their own, we have a backstop, so to speak, to be able to support them to move things forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Korey. That's very insightful. And I love that you have a toolkit instead of again, just taking one approach, because this has been dynamic from what we've experienced as well, being on the other side of the pond. And so looking at it through that lens, it totally makes sense to think of it like a more widely distributed solution rather than kind of, going to the one single source, which can become sometimes not sustainable, especially for scale. Mark, do you want to add anything to it?
I think Corey covered it beautifully. The only thing that I'll just add is, whether or not you're large or small, what the type of institution that you're coming from, any institution, and part of the efforts of Corey and the legislative team within Veep was to establish commonalities and expectations that all universities and colleges can participate in and benefit from. And I would just say, coming from Virginia Tech, yes, we have an accessibility team. I have folks that are involved in the testing and validation process of specific tools and things that are acquired across the university. However, any size institution can do some basic analysis, ask for the voluntary product accessibility template, ask for a vendor roadmap, and even the HECVAT, which is the Higher Education Community Vendor Assessment Toolkit. That toolkit now includes, I think, 18 questions now about accessibility in order to assess the vendor risk. And so in the procurement process, everybody has a dedicated amount of resources that they can provide. These tools can be viewed by anybody. It could be somebody in risk management, security, IT, accessibility, wherever you're coming from, just to do some basic analysis of the risk and exposure and moving forward with vendors and looking at the procurement process. So I just encourage everybody to become familiar with those tools, and maybe even ask those that are in the procurement process to be requesting those types of files from vendors when they engage in the procurement process.
Yes, and Mark, so we actually ended up covering a little bit of our next question, which was moving on to the next section, which is looking at what are approaches around document accessibility. So I want to kind of skip to the next question, which is about prioritization. So when we look at prioritization, a lot of what comes up in our conversations is people talking about which documents should we remediate first. What is really a priority? Is it new? Is it legacy? Because documents, when they are available, get used, and of course some more than others. So what has been helpful for you in kind of dealing with this in this methodologies, as well as what's been helpful for you with training faculty, staff, to really be able to understand prioritization, as well as tackle what is, again, like a growing volume of documents, and you're kind of having a moving target to really hit?
Yes, the environments are always dynamic, right? There's always new content being added, and so I'll speak briefly about the prioritization, and then I'll talk real briefly about some of the training efforts. So for prioritization, we leverage our data that we have inside of our LMS. We're using Canvas as well, to strategically analyze the volume and the scope of inaccessible content, and then we have prioritized meetings with colleges or departments, deans or department heads, and we look look at where do we start? Where is the most impactful effort that can be had around document accessibility? Is that looking at specifically scanned PDFs? Is that looking at Word files that don't have appropriate structure or markup behind them? Is that looking at PowerPoint files and inaccessibility inside of the PowerPoint or other presentation style format? So we like to have a collaborative conversation with units to first present data, then present resources that we can provide or the university can provide in moving them forward in making their content more accessible. We've spent a lot of time and effort really on the professional development and training aspect at Virginia Tech. And I'll quickly share two specific routes that have been successful that are listed on this particular slide. One of those routes is in creating an accessibility professional certification grant program. This is open to all faculty and staff and graduate students at no cost. And it's based on the International Association of Accessibility Professionals CPAC certification. And CPAC stands for Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies. This is a 10-week cohort, meets once per week. It's facilitated by one of my colleagues on the AT team. And we often have prior graduates of this program that are invited as guest speakers and who connect learning domains from within the CPAC to their specific work. And so while we're preparing folks to be successful in participating in the certification exam as one end goal, we're also building knowledge and expertise around Virginia Tech's available resources and tools and strategies. And that often includes, here are tools that you can use right now that are either freely available that we're supporting or that we have purchased that are available to help support remediation of accessible educational materials or the creation of accessible educational materials. And the second route I would say that's been successful for us is that we created an initiative called CALM. And CALM, CALM, is an acronym for Choose Accessible Learning Materials. And the idea is to create easy, bite-sized ways to make measured progress with digital accessibility on one specific area. The goal is to keep the messaging simple, keep it brief, keep it important so that it's easily remembered and applicable to the work that's going on across the university. And this is not just in the instructional vertical. This is in the operations vertical of the university as well. Anybody who's creating materials and sharing those materials, the CALM campaigns come into effect to provide that level of support and guidance. And so these campaigns, we have 8 campaigns. We're about ready to unveil our 9th campaign and formalize all the back end supports behind that. Things like on checking contrast or adding headings or simplifying slides, using meaningful links. These, again, are ways that folks can connect, make measured progress, and then participate in a different campaign and continue on their accessibility journey. So marketing has played a huge aspect in this, stickers and posters, and most recently we just created a series of bookmarks that are magnetic bookmarks that we're passing out to scale knowledge and awareness across the university. But it's really kind of helped with that franchising because people want to join, they're excited to join, they're excited to participate. And I mention this initiative because this is an initiative that later this summer will actually be, and we've been doing this for a while, but we're going to publicly on our website post all of the materials under a Creative Commons license so that other institutions can take this idea. As Korey mentioned, there's no shame in stealing from others. We want you, it's same, we have the same premise, same ideology. Take the information, rebrand it with your color schemes, use it in a way that works in your institution. We've had several VEEP partners that have done that, K-12 institutions and higher ed institutions, and we love that. That's exactly what we want to have happen here. So we also have a new Calm Bingo campaign, and all of those materials in order to play Calm Bingo will be available publicly under Creative Commons licensing. So the goal there again is to really build capacity in a fun, bite-sized way, but also leveraging data to inform where prioritization of document remediation should begin.
Yeah, I love that. I want to add that the very cool, calm bookmark is another interesting way to kind of just remind people of what that means, to their roles every day. So yeah, Mark, very creative. Korey, do you want to add anything to this? We also have a whole section on sustaining compliance that we will go to next.
I will just keep it very brief. And you mentioned prioritization. So if you, and I'll come at this from a different angle. Mark's talking about it. Once you have the data actually going to those colleges and schools or academic units and having discussions around this is what the numbers show. I'll talk about it from the standpoint of us looking specifically kind of a risk-oriented approach. So one of the challenges we had in the very beginning at Mason is we didn't have access to this data and this information to try and kind of figure out, you know, where are the challenges around documents, what's accessible, what's not accessible. We didn't have tools like Ally or Panorama, which we have now, to kind of help with figuring out some of those things. What we did have is we had a community that was very responsive to the needs of individuals with disabilities, and specifically those with sensory impairments, blind, low vision, deaf, and hard of hearing. And so we put together what we kind of called a MAPS campaign, which was Mason Academic Accessibility Plans. And the idea was to identify where all of our students with sensory impairments, our blind, low vision, deaf, and hard of hearing students, where are they taking courses next semester? What degree programs are they enrolled in? What academic advisors are they communicating with? Um, what faculty members are they going to engage with? Because whereas you oftentimes when you talk about training, it's like, hey, should we have a broad university-wide training where we hit everybody with digital accessibility and they learn ADA and all that stuff? It's awesome if you can do that. In most instances, you can't. What you can do is take a very targeted approach and say, from a risk-oriented standpoint, if we are going to have a lawsuit, it's going to be in these classes because of these faculty members and these academic advisors, and they can help kind of address that issue. Now, one of the things we did was when we kind of looked at the numbers of where are these students taking classes, these students were in most every degree program we had at Mason. So what was nice about that is that they couldn't just localize it to one college and school. And so semester after semester, you are adding new faculty members to your training, to your outreach. And so you will slowly reach all of the, all of those instructors anyway. And it's just a kind of another approach to kind of think about. If you take a risk-oriented approach, it's another way to get your foot in the door.
Yeah, those are two sides to prioritizing, and yeah, that's very helpful, Corey. And I want to kind of move to the sustainable aspects of compliance because we get asked a lot around, okay, so you've made some great strides at the first level to really get to establishing some initial accessibility and compliance, approaches. But what tends to happen is down the road either momentum is lost or if it's really on the shoulders of one or two key stakeholders, then if their roles change or they exit, these things kind of tend to fall back. So what do you really find are more effective ways to embed accessibility, especially with professional development? And you talked a little bit about it, and also the culture of accountability, ownership, so that it's part of the institution's DNA in a way, rather than relying on one department or a handful of individuals to shoulder that burden. And Mark, you can start, and for both of you, I would love to hear both your perspectives on this.
Sure. I think this is one that I could probably spend a half an hour on, and I bet Corey could too here. I would say just from a 20,000 foot level looking down, one recommendation that I would make is that connecting the digital accessibility efforts to the strategic planning of the institution and looking at what are the goals and the upcoming strategic efforts that are mapped out for the university and weaving in digital accessibility and document remediation into that in order to help the university accomplish those goals. That's something we've done internally using a variety of different communities of practice here at Virginia Tech, and engaging in a maturity model assessment of where we're at and where we'd like to go in relation to the with our digital accessibility program in respect to where the university is heading strategically. So that's one that I would say is a relatively easy way of helping for the sustainability aspect of digital accessibility. I would also say that in order to build champions and partners, you've got to recognize that everybody's coming to this accessibility journey at a different spot on the journey. And so really looking at universal design for learning and best practices with universal design for learning, you've got to offer a variety of platforms and methods for the community to engage and learn about digital accessibility. The CALM campaign is just one aspect of hopefully creating excitement and buy-in around digital accessibility. But everything from, being able to offer online courses, whether or not they're self-paced or synchronous courses, whether or not, and that could be on document remediation, that could be on general accessibility, digital accessibility, building that awareness, having consultations with folks to be able to understand where their needs are, what resources, what tools, what strategies they need in order to be successful. So it's I think it's long way around your question here, but it's about communication. And if you don't keep those communication lines open, then the sustainability of your accessibility program, it's going to be much more challenging. And so asking for input and feedback and include those stakeholders in including those with disabilities in your planning efforts. And then, things are going to work well and things are going to fail. We've had things at Virginia Tech that we've tried and have not gone well. And on the flip side, we've had things that we've tried and have worked really well for the university community. So it's about being nimble and flexible too in meeting the varied and constantly adjusting needs of the university stakeholders.
Thank you, Mark. And Corey, we have 1 minute because we want to leave a few minutes for questions and answers at the end.
I'll give you three quick examples. In terms of communication that Mark mentioned, we have what we call our digital accessibility and inclusion community group. That group is everybody who's ever taken advantage of any of the services that we've offered: the document remediation service, web accessibility consulting, our captioning, transcription, audio description service. Those individuals that are interested in accessibility, and we want to make sure that they stay engaged. So that digital accessibility and community inclusion community group that meets once per semester. We usually will kind of do a webinar style thing like this, where we're just kind of giving digital accessibility updates, things to kind of be aware of. And then we also follow that with a newsletter each semester. So each semester they'll get a newsletter, same thing with those updates. So same individuals get emailed. And as new things happen and things change in the community, they become more interested. Sometimes they fall off, sometimes they come back in, but it's a way to keep them kind of involved. We are also very heavily engaged with our strategic partners, those who oversee the learning management systems, those who oversee the content management systems, those who oversee our branding initiatives on campus, because they build the templates that our websites are housed on. They make choices around the learning management system that our courses are built in and that our video hosting platforms getting embedded in. That is a way to embed accessibility in as well, where you have a very targeted group of individuals that have an outsized impact on campus, as opposed to, because you're not going to reach everybody, and faculty change oftentimes, but if you can reach those individuals in those critical positions, you can have a pretty significant impact.
Yes, I love that recruitment of, like multiple perspectives and teams to have this become part of the ecosystem instead of, again, kind of having the responsibility or accountability lie with a few. So that's a nice way to kind of include sustainable practices. So we are wrapping up. We wanted to just kind of go into the Q&A portion, and there were a couple of questions that we had held for the last section. I want to start with Chris O'Neill's question, which is, do you have populations of faculty that are still holdouts, meaning many people now understand how important digital accessibility is, but I wonder if there are still populations that aren't addressing it, and what do you do for those? More awareness, requirement for them to learn? So that was one question.
I'll jump in quickly since I know time is short. All of those things, but requirements is one thing we can't do. I tell everybody that my paycheck's not big enough to tell you no. So, we really need everybody to kind of come to the table. And some of those holdouts you're not going to reach unless there is somebody that is directly impacted in their courses. And so part of what we try to do is the outreach efforts that Mark and I have highlighted today. But again, for us at Mason, there is a backstop. there is an ability to remediate things quickly, whether we do it in-house or outsource, so that we can address those needs as broadly as possible.
Thanks, Korey. And then the next question is, are there any resources, whether in WEEP or from individual institutions, that could support departments in units to prioritize when it comes to improve their compliance, and also recommendations of the types of data we ought to look at while setting priorities?
Yeah, I think I'll answer the last part there about the data. Really, I think it comes down to looking at websites, documents, video-based content. Do you have tools that you're able to analyze the volume of that content and then determine the accessibility of that content? Maybe you're looking at high-impact courses, the 101 level courses that have the highest enrollment. Maybe you're using Google Analytic data to determine your web presence as far as what is the most the websites that are accessed by the most users at your institution, and focusing to make sure that the content presented within those areas first is your starting point for determining how you prioritize accessibility.
Thanks so much, Mark. And so we want to kind of go to our last slide, which is about questions that you may have that you've not had a chance to send us today. Please reach out to us. We have Korey and Mark's email address as well as mine. And yeah, we're very happy to also send a copy of the recording from today's session. And we really enjoyed having all of you here. Thank you so much for your thoughtful questions. And Korey and Mark, thank you so much for your time. This is very insightful and enjoyable, and I'm hoping we can do something similar again. And we look forward to more conversations about this very important topic.
Thanks, Vijay. Thanks, Dipanku.
Thanks,
Yes, thank you all. Thanks to all of our participants for joining today.
Thank you
Yes,
guys for joining.
everyone. Bye.